as it pertains to entrepreneurship, let's dig into that. You have been an entrepreneur for much of your adult life, if not all. It's my understanding that you earned your first million at the age of 23. Talk to us about that journey.
By God's grace, you know. So I suffered what many young Black people in South Africa suffer, what many young Black people in Africa suffer. You know, my continent, and I love it dearly. You know, literally the logo of my company is the African continent connected by dots, because I believe that this is the birthplace of mankind. It's the future of mankind. But if we as Africans don't connect ourselves, then there's no future for mankind. Isn't that powerful? Right.
Yes.
So you know, but my continent is incredibly ageist. You look at the people in power, you look at the people in political office, you look at the ages of those people, you look at the average age of people in parliament and people passing laws. And because it's so, and then you go to corporate sector and you look at the people who are CEOs of large organizations and large corporates. You know, we're not likely to have a Mark Zuckerberg here. We're not likely to have those kind of stories, because it's difficult for young people to be given the room and then to be given the support to build those kind of things, right? And so that's why many young Africans, many talented young Africans find themselves living in the diaspora, because they're in search of those opportunities. They really want to explore their strength, their time, their talent, their abilities, and their capabilities, but often they're not given the space to do that in our beautiful continent. And until we address that, we're going to have a very big problem. So the question you asked was around my journey. I lost my father when I was 13 years old. South Africa has, since the birth of our democracy, the truth is, even before then, South Africa has suffered a crime problem. And it accelerated around the 90s, the 1990s, and even the early 2000s. It got really, really bad. And my father was brutally gunned down. My father was shot 9 times for a cell phone. And they never caught the perpetrators. The police docket, you know, the document was lost by the police. My story, by the way, is not altogether unique. It's the quintessential experience, unfortunately, for many of us who come from these places called townships, which really were concentration camps built for Black people during the days of apartheid. So, you know, so I grow up and I go to an amazing, amazing school. At the time, there was an amalgamation of our schooling system, because South Africa used to have a white schooling system and a Black schooling system. So we were divided by race. And then with the miracle of 1994, the presidency of Nelson Mandela, the collapsing of the segregation of education, we were allowed opportunities to get into those schools. So I went to a school which is called Model C. Model C simply meant that the school was a mixed private and public. And I had the most amazing opportunity going to that school. And then immediately after the school, I went to university. My mom couldn't afford to pay for. We call it university, you guys call it college. And so I had to drop out. We have something called financial exclusion, which basically means the university sends you a letter saying you can't continue because you haven't been able to pay your fees. And so, you know, I then kind of went about and went, well, you know, I'm 19 years old. What am I going to do now? By God's incredible grace, I had been doing public speaking when I was at high school and had the opportunity to travel the world. And I'd met some good people while I was traveling the world. I spent some time in Australia, spent some time in the US and the UK, in Brazil and many other places. And so I thought that I'm going to start a business. And at the time, South Africa had a problem with youth unemployment. And my business was finding young unemployed South Africans jobs in the rest of the world. That's what I did, and that's how I made my first million. The business called GPSA, Global Professionals South Africa. And I learned an awful lot in that time. I learned an awful lot about myself. I learned an awful lot about my people. I learned an awful lot about the environment that I live in and how to be empathetic and conscious of people's circumstances. I'll never forget one of the most revolutionary things I did for my office at the time was I bought a shoe shining kit that I had sitting at reception, because many, particularly young Black people coming from these townships, traveled tens of kilometers. And by the time you get to the office, your shoes don't shine. And you know, if you're going into an interview, you want to make an impression, you want to make sure that your shoes shine, right? So those kind of small subtleties were a big part of what enabled me to build an empathetic approach to business, that the idea that good business is actually good business.